Hi guys. So I was getting ready today and I was just thinking about a couple things that were running through my mind. Um, the main one being that it doesn't look like I will be teaching again this fall. Something that I'm pretty sad about, not just because I've been out of school for a year already, but I just really miss being in the classroom with the kids, and I would really just like to be teaching again. But I was thinking, between thinking about that and the fact that on Tumblr there is a large community of younger people that have a lot of really well developed and critical ideas that they are expressing through this forum. So one of the main themes that I've seen from this younger population is that they don't perceive that they are listened to or understood, which is very typical when you're dealing with teenagers and adults. They tend not to listen to each other. But my experiences in school, and when I say school, I mean teaching, was that I found that the more that I listened to these kids, that the more I was able to open my mind and learn. As an adult, I mean, I'm 24, so I'm not that old, but you can learn quite a bit by listening to the perspective of younger people. And I'm not just talking about somebody who is 14, 15, 16. I'm talking about kids who are 10 years old. In particular, I taught a lesson at the very end of my student teaching rotation where I was teaching fourth grade. And these are kids that were around 10 years old, and I had a fairly large class. I had 29 students, 18 boys and 11 girls, so definitely a large bunch. And I chose a story with the help of my supervising teacher that was titled I believe it was Uncle Jed's Barbershop, and it was really focusing on the civil rights movement and the segregation and oppression of people of color during that time, focusing on a fictional story about a barber named Uncle Jed who traveled around to give haircuts to other people of color because there was very few barbershops that would allow people of color in to get their haircut at the time, and also to get shaved because that was something that was done at barbershops. I believe still is. I'm not a guy, so I don't know, but it was a very interesting story, and even though it was only about 10 pages, I made it last the entire week because I really wanted to go through and really dissect the central themes and ideas that was in this story, because as I had worked with these students through the last 8 weeks, I really pushed them. Well, I don't want to say pushed because I didn't want to create an environment that caused any kind of anxiety. But I wanted them to think critically, and I wanted them to dig deeper into the stories that we were working on. We had a set reading program that was provided throughout the district that we had to use, and I didn't really like teaching cut and dry lessons like that. It really just kind of sucks the fun out of it to open a book and, say, okay, this is what we're doing, and not have any ingenuity in it. I'm the type of person that likes to add my own flair into things. I taught a lesson one time on air pressure by stabbing a potato with a straw, which they thought was the coolest thing ever. And that's just the kind of thing that I like to do. So I really pushed them to and used different sensory modes because the reading program really kind of just focused on an audio and visual type approach, and I really wanted them to integrate those sensory approaches instead of using them separately. So we worked on that over the last couple weeks, but I had also found through the discussion that they really, really had some great ideas about things, and that if you kind of just asked a few more questions or pushed things a little bit further, that it was amazing some of the feedback that I could get from them. One thing in particular, and I love to read. I've always loved to read, and I really like to try and inspire kids to love to read because there's so many kids now that have so many screens, whether it's an iPod or a cell phone or a computer or video games. A lot of kids have these things hooked up in their rooms, and it's kind of squashed the generation of, I had one professor refer to it as flashlight readers, which is kids that are hiding under their covers at night reading a book with a flashlight. That was me. But you're not seeing that as much now. So I really wanted to inspire kids to love to read because for many of them, because they don't enjoy it, it makes it much more difficult for them to do it. So I had a few students that had a hard time reading, that had difficulty with enunciation or flow in their reading, but still wanted to try. And I did have one instance where I had a student that was very, very eagerly raising his hand. He wanted to read, and some of the other students kind of groaned because they knew that he was going to read a little bit slower. And I absolutely 100% called on him because I think it was great that even though he knew he had difficulty reading, that he still wanted to make an effort in front of 28 other little people that didn't really want him to. So I called on him and he read the passage. We were reading a story, called The Houdini Box, which is a great, great story. If anybody has young children in their families, it was one of my favorite stories to teach. Unbeknownst to me, they'd already read it with the librarian, so they knew how it was going to end, but it was still a really fun story to teach. And we were reading a particular part of the book where this little boy is meeting Harry Houdini, who is his biggest idol, and this was a dream come true for him. So the little boy read the passage, and I had him read a paragraph, and then I stopped him. And he had read as I had expected him to, a little below his grade level, and he had read in kind of a monotone voice, but he had done a great job with his vocabulary, with his stops and starts at the beginning and end of sentences, but I really wanted him to get a feel, because when you hear somebody that's reading monotone, it often means that they're just reading the words, and when you are focusing so hard on reading just the words, the conceptual meaning kind of gets lost in translation. It's harder for children to put comprehension together when they are focusing on getting the words out. And I know that part of this was that he really wanted to look good in front of the class by not stopping and starting too often or pausing in the middle of the sentence. So I wanted him, because he had done well with that, I wanted to give him a chance to really get a deeper understanding of this particular scene. So I posed the question to the class, even though I knew I was going to call on him again, to imagine meeting their favorite person, whoever they idolized the most, and they started raising their hand. Some of them said, silly things, people from TV shows or their favorite sports players. And I asked this little boy, I said, what would be the biggest deal, your favorite person in the world that you can meet? And he named this person, I think it was like a WWE fighter. It was pretty funny. But I asked him to close his eyes and picture in his mind meeting this person. And then I asked him to reread the passage where this little boy was talking about meeting Harry Houdini and how the words just came tumbling out of his mouth when he was talking to Houdini. And he reread this passage in perfect tone. His speech sped up a little bit, and the tone of voice was absolutely on point, and I really saw the light bulb go on for to understand exactly what this scene was about. And those were the types of things that I liked to encourage. So fast forward to the end of my student teaching experience where we were reading Uncle Jed's Cabin, and Uncle Jed's Barber Shop, and I was really pulling together all of these concepts, these ideas, reading with tone of voice, connecting yourself to the story and your previous experiences. I really wanted to pull all these themes together because this was not something that was pulled out of the anthology of stories that was required to teach. This was something that I had collaborated with the classroom teacher on to put together as kind of something to leave the class with. I was very sad to be leaving them. After 8 weeks, I was very, very attached to these kids, and I just really love teaching fourth grade. Kids are given way less credit than they are due in regards to their perception and their intelligence. So we are going through this story and talking about, as we go through, some of the things that people of color were subjected to during this time. And it was a sensitive subject, but I thought it was something that was really, really important to teach because I really wanted them to understand how different things were. And a lot of them really were just so confused as to how it was even possible that people were treated in this way, because it's not even something that they could comprehend. That we went over a particular scene in the story where a little girl was very sick and she was brought to the hospital barely conscious, and she was left to sit in a waiting room for hours and hours while white people were treated first that had very less serious conditions than this little girl. And I just remember the looks on their faces, and they couldn't comprehend why somebody's skin color could have any impact on how they were treated, because it just wasn't something that occurred to them. And I've tried to relate it so they could understand how ridiculous this concept was by saying, imagine if I went to a store and I was told to leave because I have green eyes. And they said, well, that's stupid. Why would it matter that you had green eyes? I said, now imagine I went to get my hair done and they said, no, because I have brown hair. And they're like, well, that's stupid. Why does it matter that you have brown hair? I said, do you think the same thing of people's skin color? And they were like, what do you mean? I said, does it matter? Do you think that anybody should ever be denied certain rights or privileges because of the color of their skin? And they were all like, no. It never even occurred to them that this was something that was discriminated against. And again, it's a very sensitive issue. I had one African American child in the classroom, so I was really trying to be sensitive, because when you put these ideas into kids, and not put these ideas into kids' heads, but discuss these ideas and discuss these concepts, many of these things, not segregation and the severe oppression that occurred during this time period, but there is still racism and discrimination very much alive in the United States, and that's why I thought it was so important for children to really open their mind to something like this. So one of the other things that we talked about was Martin Luther King Jr. and peaceful protesting. And as we're going through this, we were talking about the importance of peaceful protesting, and the kids really had an absolutely excellent grasp on the fact that they used peaceful protesting instead of violent protesting because it made more of an impact. That sitting at a restaurant table was different than smashing up a business or something to that degree, that it made more of an impact for them to be sitting there doing nothing, and for those images to be captured of the absolutely abhorrent cruelty that they were subjected to for doing something as simple as a sit-in at a restaurant where, African American people were not allowed to be served. And as we were talking about this, I had a student raise his hand, and I called on him, and he said, I think that Martin Luther King Jr. and the other protesters were kind of like Gandhi. And I said, tell me more about this. Explain to me what your thinking is. I'm very interested in what you're saying. Tell me a little bit more. And he said, well, they both used peaceful protesting to achieve what they were looking for. And that totally blew my mind, that a 10-year-old would be aware of Gandhi and what he did to kind of further his movement and to spread his voice was through the use of peaceful protesting, and to make that connection that they used nonviolent means to communicate what they were trying to get across. So I thought that was really awesome. And it really just kind of demonstrated that if you allow children an open discussion, that they will kind of put fears aside and raise their hands. I had every single student participate in the discussion when we worked on Uncle Jed's Barbershop. None of them had any issue raising their hand, voicing their thoughts. And there were a couple times that I did get into a little bit of hot water because, like I said, again, this is a very sensitive subject, and unfortunately, some children are indoctrinated with some really unsavory opinions on people who are not like them. I'll put it that way. And the bottom line is that we have these kids 8 hours a day. We have 8 hours to have them come in through the door, kind of deconstruct how the weekend was, how the night before was, get them settled, and then we need to teach them. Teaching is just so much more than reading and writing and math and science and social studies, because we have these kids 8 hours a day, and we have them with a whole community of other children. We're not just teaching them knowledge, and anybody who thinks that teaching is glorified babysitting, it's frustrating. Let me put it that way. Teaching, to me, I felt like it was a huge responsibility. It's almost a little daunting, especially when I first got in there. But after you're in there for a couple weeks, you learn how to kind of roll with the punches, because you really are just so much more than, somebody who's regurgitating facts onto a board to have these kids swallow it and regurgitate it back to you. It's not about teaching to just a test. You are in here, you are parent, you are counselor, you are friend, you are social worker, you are instructor, you're a shoulder to cry on, you're an ear to listen, you're there to pretty much do whatever these kids need you for, because you are the first line of defense. And this is true for, kids, not just kids who are having difficulty in school, but kids who are having difficulty with the kids that are having difficulty at home. You can make or break a child. And I think this was the scariest part of embarking on teaching, was that you are really saddled with that responsibility, that you can either teach a child to hate school or you can teach a child to love school. And I remember that for so many years, I was miserable in school. I hated school. I was severely bullied, not just by students, by some of the teachers. And I just remember how isolated and alienated I felt from everybody. I just wanted to kind of curl up in a ball and disappear, because I really felt like I had nobody that would have my back. I remember getting detention multiple times when I was probably 11 or 12 years old for really not doing anything. And to put things in perspective, I went through school with ADD and ADHD. I went through school with learning disabilities in processing. They labeled it nonverbal learning disability, meaning that it was a learning disability in skills that were not my verbal skills. As you can see, we're almost up to 20 minutes here. I don't have a problem talking. But despite that, I was quiet for a very long time. I was ridiculed almost every time I raised my hand or opened my mouth, so I stopped doing it. Probably around the time of 5th grade, I spoke to just about nobody. And this continued on for a very long time, people were just really horrible to me. And I just remember praying and hoping that a teacher would come up to me and say, is everything all right? Are you doing okay? Because I would have looked at him and said, no, I'm not okay. I'm miserable every day I walk through these doors. These kids are mean to me. You're mean to me. And but nobody ever asked. So I just shut my mouth. I tried to get my work done, which was very difficult sometimes because I would fall behind in my notes. And then I wouldn't be able to catch up and I would miss things in class. And I just kind of skated by through most of the time. Even though I was fairly intelligent, I was pulling, a couple A's here and there, but mostly B's and C's. And I really was just not, I probably could have had straight A's if I had help. And I received a lot of backlash for any kind of support I did have. I mean, even in high school, it was very difficult for me to concentrate if there was outside noise, especially during a test. And I really think it's just ridiculous, the seats they made us sit in high school, because you have this desk space that is the size of 2 textbooks and a chair the same size, and you're blocked in on one side. And for somebody who has ADD combined with, anxiety and learning disabilities, it was like sitting in a trap. So I used to go take my tests in another room. And sometimes I would choose to do this, sometimes I wouldn't. It really depended on the class and how I was feeling that day. But biology was one of the classes that I really did not like. So most of the time I would take my test there. Now, standard procedure for us taking a test in another room was for the teacher to send the test to the resource room. And instead of going to class with everyone else, we just go straight to the resource room to take our test and then go back to class when we were done. And I had a teacher in particular who, for some reason, didn't like doing this and just refused to do it. His way of operating was that and when I say we, I mean myself and anybody else in the class who was going to be taking the test in another room. There's a few other kids that also went to the other room to take the test. He would make us go to class with everyone else, take attendance, check in, whatever. And then he would raise his hand. He would not raise his hand. He would stand in front of the class and he would say, anybody who's going to the resource room to take their test, please stand up. And this was the most humiliating thing that I've ever experienced in my life, because it really just made me feel like an idiot. Even though I knew that I wasn't stupid, and I could rationalize that in my brain, he just made me feel so stupid that I was standing up with probably 2 or 3 other kids while everybody else was sitting there, and I was just sitting there like, oh my God, please just let me disappear into the floor, because everybody is looking at me like I'm an idiot. Even though I knew in my mind that the reason that I was going to take the test somewhere else was that so that I would have an equal opportunity to excel and have an equal platform to learn as these other kids, because accommodations like this are not giving advantages to the kids who need them. They're leveling the playing field, and I wish somebody had explained that to me at the time, because teachers who did stuff like this were very common. Now, not only did he do this, once he had identified the kids and made us stand up while everyone else was sitting down, he would then take the test, fold them in half, and staple them at the bottom, and then send us up to the resource room, because he was convinced that we were going to cheat. And again, this was incredibly, incredibly humiliating. And I wish I had said something to him. I really do. Because I don't know if he was aware of how that made us feel, or if he just honestly didn't give a shit. But I really wish I had had the balls to stand up and say, you know what? this is not okay. You cannot treat us like this. You cannot single us out like this for trying to do our best. And eventually what ended up happening, big surprise, was that I stopped going upstairs to take my tests. And you know what happened to my grade in biology? It took a freaking nosedive. And I ended up with probably a solid C. Not that I loved biology, but I was doing fairly well. And I was not getting extra help. I had nobody giving me the answers. I sat in the corner in the quiet and did my work. And I was made to feel like I was getting some kind of special treatment. And it really never occurred to me how backwards this was until I was having difficulty in college, and I was afraid to ask for help. And I remember going to see my advisor, who was also a professor. I didn't end up having her to senior year, but she was such a sweetheart, and she was one of my favorite people at that whole school. And she had a big squishy chair, and I just remember sitting in it and saying, you know, I'm having a really hard time. And it was so hard for me to go to her and to say this, because I had been indoctrinated for so many years that I should be able to do things the exact same way as somebody else. And I had done a couple field experiences so far, both in elementary and in special ed. And she said to me, what if it was one of your students that was sitting in front of you? What if the tables were turned and you had a kid sitting in front of you? What would you say to them if they asked you for help? And this really got to me. It still does, because it made me realize that ever since I was a kid, that I always deserved to ask for help and receive it. I never deserved to be treated the way some of the other teachers treated me, or how some of the other kids treated me for being in special ed. Because she said to me, you are intelligent. She said, you have wonderful ideas, and I really think you're going to be a great teacher. She said, you asking for help is not unreasonable. And after that, things got a lot easier. I had a really hard time the first couple years of college because I was not prepared. Because I had gotten into not asking for help, I had gotten into a habit of asking for extensions, because it would take me longer to get stuff done when I didn't know what I was doing, obviously. So after talking to this advisor and going through this with her, I was like, you know what? I'm not going to be embarrassed to ask for help if I need it, because it's a lot less embarrassing to ask for help than it is to be like, yep, I've got another assignment 2 weeks late because it took me that long to figure out what to do. And sometimes it was just something as simple as the wording. And I had a few professors like this, and some of them really were just not aware if I was having a hard time. And I found that once I went to them and spoke with them, that they were very open to helping me, because we're in the education field. These people are used to working with kids, and none of them ever judged me for asking for help or for coming to them. I remember meeting with one professor in particular, and if anybody is ever interested in becoming a teacher and they live on the East Coast, please, please, please check out Riviera College. It's now called Riviera University. It's a small school. You're not a number. You're not going to get lost. And there's a lot of great professors there. This professor in particular, I had her the first time sophomore year, and we kind of butted heads at first. To say the least, I was a little ornery because I had a really hard time in her class. This was pre-pep talk from my advisor, and I was not asking for help at the time. She finally had asked me to come down to her office post-pep talk with my other professor/advisor and let her know what was going on. This was right before spring break, where I knew I was going to be going home, and that was part of the problem. I don't live at home anymore. I didn't for any of the breaks that I was home from school. Occasionally spring break or something to that degree, but I spent the summers living with my sister in Connecticut, which is why I now live in this area. But I wasn't looking forward to going home. It was a tumultuous place to be, and I just didn't want to be there. And I spoke to her about this, let her know what was going on in my life, some things that were bothering me, and I really opened up to her, which was not something that I was very good at, because my family does not encourage the sharing of the feelings. I ended up becoming very close to this professor, and she ended up becoming one of my favorite professors. She really inspired me to really work on teaching reading a lot more effectively, and she was the one that coined the term flashlight readers. And I remember my senior year, she was one of the last professors that I had before I started student teaching. Sorry guys, I was tearing up a little bit. And I remember that we had a pinning ceremony for the teachers, and the two teachers that I had been working with were not able to make it. The people that I was student teaching for were not able to make it, so I didn't have anyone to pin me. So I asked her, and she was so honored to pin me that I was really kind of blown away by that. And as she put this pin on me, she said to me, "I'm so proud of you. You have come so far. You have accomplished so much. And I think you're going to be an awesome teacher." And this was really just so great to hear, because, I mean, you get the validation through seeing the scores on your kids, whatever, seeing your students improve. I had parents that came in and told me that their children were doing better, that they were happier, and this was huge for me as well. But I really had, as a person, and since I was a little kid, been looking for somebody to validate me and say, you know what, you're doing a good job. Because it wasn't something that somebody said to me. I really just wanted somebody to tell me that what I was doing mattered. So, having this done for me, was a huge deal. And it's really made me a better teacher, because I don't ever ignore what kids have to say. I validate their thoughts, their feelings, their opinions, because I remember what it feels like to not have this done for me. And I would never do that to a kid, because, like I said again, you can make or break a kid. And I think it's so important. I don't care how old they are. I also taught special ed for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. That was my second rotation of student teaching. And I met a lot of kids that were like me, like I was in high school, or even towards the end of middle school, just withdrawn and angry. And, you know, I would think about how I might have turned out if I had different people in my life when I was younger. And maybe things would have been easier at that time, but it may not have brought me to the point in my life where I was like, you know what, I had such a shitty time in school that if I can make one kid's life easier and not make this a hellhole for them, that's what I'm gonna do. So it's almost 35 minutes to this video. If you have any questions or comments, send me an ask in my box. I'll be more than happy to answer them. And I guess I will see you guys later.